Good morning, everybody. My name is Rose Luna, and I'm the CEO of the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. Thank you so much for joining us for a special additional edition of TAASA Talks, the 87th. We released one last week where we talked about all the great things happening in regards to budget, all the great things happening in regards to our TASA's priorities. But today I'm super excited to have with me Liz Boyce. She's our general counsel / director of policy and advocacy. She's like, / I need a raise. I'm sure I know it, Liz. You do so much. But excited to bring Liz today to talk about this other piece of the legislative pie, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's about some recommendations from the governor's office task force. But we will get to that in just a second. But just wanted to remind everybody that today is the last day of Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. And I have seen all of the great, amazing online activities, virtual events. Some of you are having in-person events. That's great, being super safe. But it is so important. This month is so important. Of course, we know that, all the sexual assault awareness is not relegated just to 1 month, but we just want to highlight the importance. And what better way to do that than to address for us today the really difficult situation that happened at the Capitol. It hasn't even been a week since we found out about it. So last Saturday, a story broke that a Capitol staffer was meeting with lobbyists or a lobbyist. Either way, in that meeting, there was a drug facilitated in the drugs in the drink of some sort. I'm sorry, I don't have the words this morning. And so that was reported. I think all levels of law enforcement, all levels of those at the Capitol were made aware. And of course, we were really heartened by the overwhelming support for this person coming forward to let everybody know this is what happened to me. And also, right, behind that was the same, from all across the political spectrum, you had reps and senators all saying the same thing. Basically, we need to address this culture of violence, this culture of sexual harassment that's been festering. I mean, those are their words, not necessarily my words. That's stuff we say anyway, but that was coming from them. And I was very heartening to hear that. Well, since then, yesterday, there was a statement that was released by DPS and by Travis County District Attorney's Office. And they basically said that there was not enough evidence to have a criminal case in this piece of that investigation. And so, we heard that. We are, we're kind of accustomed to that outcome, because separately from that, just in general, y'all, what happens with sexual assault cases is they don't necessarily make it through the criminal justice system. They just don't align yet. We're working on that. Governor's Office Task Force, Sexual Assault Task Force, we're really digging into the weeds to figure out how can we get these to align. We all want accountability, but more importantly, we want survivors to be believed, we want survivors to be heard, and to be respected throughout that process. But right now, in general, sexual assault cases that go through the criminal justice system don't make it very far. Less than 7% do, and most of those are pled down. Again, when we pull that out to the reality of sexual assault in Texas, as you all know, I know I'm speaking to the echo chambers here, but in case there's somebody from the Capitol listening, 1 in 5 men, 2 in 5 women in Texas will be sexual assault victims at some point in their lifetime. Over 90% of those do not report. So again, we're dealing with a small subsection of this huge problem of those that report. Those that report, as I mentioned, less than 7% make it all the way through, and most of those are pled out. So criminal justice system dispositions and the lack thereof does not mean something didn't happen, right? We don't know the specifics of this case, so I'm no longer talking about that. I'm just talking in general. So we're going to just wait for the rest of the facts to come out. If any more come out, withhold judgment, and more importantly, just be here to support survivors of sexual assault. We think the person that came forward is very brave for doing that, and we hope that others do as well. We're very heartened. Again, a statement last night from Speaker Phelan, Reps Howard and Thompson, a joint statement. It was a beautiful statement to talk about the fact that there was this investigation, this was the outcome. However, they still have a commitment to talking about these issues to make a safer workplace for everybody involved at the Capitol. And we are excited to hear that that's where the storyline is heading next. So just very thankful to them, and a big shout out to them for that. So yeah, with that being said, now I'm going to switch gears. And the reason why we're here today, before all that happened, is I wanted to have Liz here because Liz and I are a part of a steering committee. So back in the 86th legislative session, TAASA worked very hard with Representative Donna Howard's office, along with CAC Texas, with HB 1590, and that was basically to establish a sexual assault survivor task force at the governor's office. That all passed. The governor signed it. That was a historic thing for sexual assault advocates, for sexual assault survivors in Texas, because we've always been on the outside looking in, always trying to get our, anecdotes in to say, this is wrong. What are y'all doing? And now we are here at the table. So this is just a good example of two legislative sessions pragmatically and beautifully coming together. So it passed last legislative session. Before this legislative session started, we've done a lot of work and we were able to put a set of recommendations. So either way, the good news is, in addition to that, is that TAASA is in the driver's seat. So Liz and I are on the steering committee, along with Justin Wood from CAC of Texas, and also the tremendous leadership that we have at the governor's office in Amy Snoddy and Hillary England and LaDonna McCrae and Nicole Martinez. So that's the group driving this ship, bus, whatever you want to call it. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Liz, because Liz has been super instrumental in the policy aspect of this and shaping these recommendations. So Liz, thank you for being here. And I would love for you to explain what's going on and where that is in the legislative process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rose, for having me today. So just to, as Rose was saying, just to kind of recap, over the last year, the task force has been meeting every quarter as a large group of statutory stakeholders, but more frequently than that, every month, and sometimes twice a month, we've been meeting in smaller groups of multidisciplinary professionals. We call those working groups. And there's, something like 15 or more of these working groups. And in those groups, we're discussing these broad concepts and specific protocols related to evidence collection, forensic exam access, best practices in survivor care. We've had a number of issues that we've looked at. And specifically, we're looking at what barriers survivors are facing when they seek out an exam after their assault, and the bottlenecks that occur with rape kits as they're processed and entered into CODIS, and the pieces of the system that are actually just re-traumatizing to survivors. So through this process, each of the working groups, they came up with several recommendations for change. And in total, there were actually over 150 recommendations made. Some of those recommendations, we could make those directly to the state agencies that they were affected. So for instance, DPS Crime Lab, there were recommendations made to change their manual. Recommendations were made to change the Texas evidence collection protocol. Those were easy, just to make those recommendations straight to the office. But in some cases, some of the recommendations, in order to take effect, required a change to the law itself. So the policy working group, which was made up of Justin Wood and myself, as well as several different stakeholders who are primarily responsible for policy within their agencies, took a look at these recommendations and turned them into statutory language that then could be potential remedies for the problems that we see facing survivors. So those recommendations were made in November, and several lawmakers actually reached out to the governor's office and were interested in taking ownership of these recommendations. So they sought out the proposed language and they turned them into bills that have been filed and are now pending in the legislature. So the first one I was going to speak about is HB 2706. That bill is sponsored by Representative Donna Howard, and it relates to very important changes to the Health and Safety Code, primarily to include standalone community-based clinics with safe-ready facilities. So just a little context, up to this point, under current law, hospitals that don't employ or contract with a forensic examiner can actually refer a survivor to what is known in the code as a safe-ready facility. And that's just defined as a healthcare facility that does have access to a forensic examiner. The problem has been that this definition is so closely linked to hospitals it leaves out the wonderful standalone clinics that have been coming up over the last 10 years or so that actually are not affiliated with a hospital, but they've been serving survivors in a trauma-informed setting. They've been creating a best practice, really, for survivor care, for forensic exam treatment, but actually they weren't considered by the state to be safe ready because of the limits of that definition in the code. So HB 2706 just makes it clear that these clinics are safe ready facilities. It includes them in that definition, and it allows them basically to be fully reimbursed for their services by CDC, as well as be included on the list of safe ready facilities that we see on the HHSC website. So this was a huge piece that we worked on, and we feel like it will make a huge difference to survivors in being able to have greater access to exams, greater options for where they want to go seek out exams. And we're just really proud of this legislation and really thankful to Representative Howard for carrying it. The next bill is HB 2555, and it is authored by Representative Neave of Dallas. She also has another bill that I'll speak about later called HB 2462. And essentially 2555 makes a lot of very important changes to the government code as they relate to Track It. And Track It, as you might remember from a couple of sessions ago, is the system that was set up to track your forensic exam kit through the system. So a survivor can know at any point in time, in real time, where that kit is in the system. Some problems have come up through the implementation of that process. And, just like with any bill, sometimes there are tweaks that need to be made. So this bill just simply makes those corrections, makes it clear, for instance, that alleged is removed when we're talking about sexual assaults, because that was something that was being twisted by different people in the state. It clarifies that kits from deceased victims should be tracked. It clarifies that the amount of evidence that should be included in the kit itself. It requires DPS to prepare a report of unanalyzed kits, and it provides that non-compliance with the evidence collection laws can result in funding cuts. So it really tries to put a little bit more teeth into the process to allow for a smoother experience and ensure that those kits get tested and as they're supposed to. And finally, HB 2462 makes changes to the Code of Criminal Procedure. And it does something that we've been hearing stories in the field for years about how even though a survivor is supposed to be afforded an exam if they appear to a hospital within 120 hours, that there is one small exception that seems to be misinterpreted. And that is if there's prior history of false reports, and in this case, there is no corroborating evidence. So that is a very small, narrow exception, but it gets utilized far too often and by law enforcement, and they use that as an excuse to limit access to exams, is what we've seen throughout the state. So what the task force decided to do is we're just going to remove that exception completely. We're just going to take that out. It just contributes to a culture myth that survivors really are just liars. And so we're just going to take that out because it doesn't belong in the code anymore. So HB 2462 acknowledges that. It gives the discretion over access to an exam to the survivor where it belongs. Additionally, this bill requires that minors be given an exam regardless of the number of hours after the assault. So for both acute and non-acute exams, it's a mandate now that they receive an exam. Essentially, that's broad strokes of what these three bills do. And we think that, they're going to make huge changes in the experience for survivors and limit re-traumatization through the system. We just really appreciate Representative Neave and Representative Howard for taking ownership and responsibility for making sure these get through the system. At this point, they're doing quite well. We're happy to report that they're, through the House. 2706 just passed yesterday, and all three are in the Senate now. So they're in very good shape at this point.
Wonderful. And Liz, in the Senate, we have some really great allies there attached to these bills, and it's Senator Nelson, is that right? And also Senator Paxton. Is that did I get that correct?
Yes. That is right.
Okay,
I believe there's some joint authors. I don't have them all in front of me, but yes, those are the primary sponsors for these bills for sure when they get over there. Yeah.
wonderful. So, and those women have been just true allies to the movement, true allies to our work in more ways than one, and this bill being one of them. But I just wanted to say how it's so exciting to hear you say it, as you're describing all these things and reliving, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, reliving all those hours of review and kind of discussion. And I really wanted to give a shout out to the governor's office and the staff that I mentioned earlier. They really made sure that we didn't just glance at this stuff. You could be a part of a work group and you can get away with, oh yeah, that looks good. Oh no. They had a system where if I didn't submit something, they were hounding me like creditors or something. Not that I get hounded by creditors, but it was, again, they just made sure that our voices were there at the table, and I really appreciated that. Also, I just hope that the folks that are seeing this just really see the great work, and I'm going to just uplift TAASA for a whole second. The great work that TAASA is doing as an organization, creating change at the Texas Capitol that now is playing out in very pragmatic ways, in the way that we came together, brought the right people together through HB 1590 to make things better for sexual assault survivors and those who work on their behalf. And of course, the person that made this all possible is Representative Donna Howard. This was her idea. She brought the right people to the table, which is TAASA and Texas CAC. And now here we are, truly doing our part to make a difference in this movement. So it's just beautiful to think about. So thank you, Liz, for giving us that update. And I just wanted everyone to know that in addition to the wonderful things that and Catherine talked about last week, we also have this. So we are just all over the place over there. And also, we would like to remind you all, the TAASA conference is coming up in July. And so we would love for you all to register as soon as you can. I mean, I keep hearing about everyone wants to start to have this statewide conversation. Well, I don't think there's any better place to do that than at the TAASA conference. If you go to taasaconference.org, just sign up. We have some really great workshops. We have some really great coffee talks in the morning where we're going to talk about real issues that not only affect survivors, but affect those who are doing this work, right? This is about how can we roll up our sleeves and get the job done? How can we talk about this in a way that's meaningful? And then we have some really great keynotes at the end of the day for those 3 days. We have added on a half day because we had so many great workshop proposals. So we hope to see you there. Please sign up. And until then, if you have any other questions about policy, it's policy@taasa.org. Liz and her team are amazing. They are getting this thing rolling through. Liz, do you have any final thoughts?
Just be there and make your voice heard when you hear about a bill that you really strongly want to support. If it impacts survivors, we want to hear from you. We want you to make your voice heard. So, contact us, let us know. We can plug you into the process. And thanks for being partners in this with us.
Yes, I think that's why we've been so successful. We've had survivors up front and center, and we've also had our partners at the local level really pushing this through. We've had a really great team. So thank y'all for doing that, and we'll see y'all next time.